the idea for this whole day started when I heard Jon make a presentation at another conference on the East Coast, and was really engaged by the idea and thought it would be a really great fit for our university. And so I'm really pleased that we've kind of come around and now we're able to host him here. So just an overview. Here's what we hope to that you'll come away with during our session. So we hope that you'll get a better understanding of what COIL courses are, learn about some of the resources that are available. We're going to talk a little bit about the institutional support that's needed to make these ideas go from kind of the exception at an institution to something that can be quite common, normalized. We also hope to generate a sense of momentum for doing this type of work by connecting with one another and sharing ideas, and longer term create a learning community that can support one another. And we'll be building on those latter 2 points throughout the day and into the closing workshop this afternoon. So get those clickers ready again, because we also are curious to know how many of you know about COIL and what your experience is. So Jon, is this pretty common with the groups that you've...
It's hard to say, but yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So when we're planning our session, we were trying to gauge, you know, what our audience is going to be like. And it's nice to have this.
Yeah,
this visual.
It is great.
Yeah. And one more question, and this is a little bit different. So based on what you know or what you think, what do you think are some of the defining characteristics of COIL courses? And for this question, you can actually select a couple of different responses. And there isn't a right answer here. And the purpose of this question is to touch on some of the themes that we'll be exploring during the presentation. So give it your best shot based on what you know, what you think you know. Oh, sorry. I think you have to click your response, and then I'm going to move on to show what people have thought. So I think this is what we have gathered so far. And as I said, we're going to be looking at these themes more closely as we continue. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jon to kick us off and
Thank you.
get started.
Thanks a lot, Natalia. Let me reorient myself for a moment. I'm going to start a timer. So in addition to somebody in the back who's going to start waving things in front of me, I'll have something here. So I'm really glad to be here at what I actually see as a kind of momentous event in the growth of this new educational format that we call COIL, or Collaborative Online International Learning. And I just want to acknowledge there are many other terms for this. This is the term we've been using, and it seems to be getting traction. Some people call it virtual mobility. Some people call it telecollaboration. I've heard somebody call it cyber pedagogy. I mean, it's one of the interesting things about something that's this new, that everybody's calling it something different. And the problem is, if you then want to Google it, what do you Google? And the secondary issue that lies here is that many of us who are using this in the classroom, when we do a paper or report out, it's in our disciplinary associational journal. And that doesn't get shared outside of that area usually. So you might have brilliant work being done by some sociologists, but nobody else will ever know they're even doing it. So we have an issue of that type. It's the siloing effect that universities are so prone to. So one of the hallmarks of this kind of work is that different institutions and cultures practice different teaching and learning styles. So when we work together across cultures, these differences need to be discussed and negotiated. In general, US teachers have gradually adopted a more interactive teaching style, while much of the rest of the world favors direct lecturing. For my presentation, I'm going to mix modalities, as I have just written 2 chapters of a book about our work, and I've decided to read some short chapter fragments as part of my presentation and approach part of what I'm doing here as more like a lecture. At other times, I'm going to show a couple of videos and a few slides. So you're going to get a mixed bag presentation from me. It doesn't just mean I'm confused. I'm doing this, and I'm sort of doing this intentionally, although it may confuse me anyway. We'll see how it goes. So I'm first going to read a little bit of boilerplate about what the COIL model is. It's not so different from some things that may have been distributed, but I feel like I should start with something that says this is the basics. So COIL isn't a technology or a platform. It's really a teaching and learning paradigm that develops cross-cultural awareness across shared multicultural learning environments. It fosters exchanges between teachers and students with peers abroad through the use of internet-based tools that link our university classes between geographically distant locations. And unlike regular or traditional, it's kind of a funny term to put, but traditional online courses, they've only been around a short while, but I'm calling them traditional, which are provided by one higher education institution to students around the world, and I would include MOOCs in that in general. COIL is based upon developing team-taught learning environments where teachers from 2 cultures or more work together to develop a shared syllabus emphasizing collaborative student learning. And I won't have time to go into this idea of collaboration too much, but I just want to leave you with, we're talking about collaboration, not cooperation. There's really an importance to make these classes meaningful, that you don't simply, let's say to the students, we're going to do a research paper, and we're going to do it collaboratively. And what ends up happening if you do that is each student does a section of the paper, and at the last day they stick it together, and they say, we just collaborated. In fact, they may have never talked about what they're doing amongst themselves. And this is a downfall of unscaffolded, I would say, collaboration. So you really need to build a process for your students so they're actually having to edit each other's work. They're having to debate the validity of each other's points. Otherwise, you won't get this real engagement, and you won't get the real intercultural learning. So in theory, these courses will give new contextual meaning to the ideas and texts they explore, while providing students new venues in which to develop their cross-cultural awareness. The classes may be online, and this is in response to one of the prompts that Natalia put out. More often, they're actually offered in a blended format, with traditional face-to-face sessions taking place at both institutions, while collaborative student work takes place online. I would say at this point about 80% of the COIL courses that I'm aware of are actually 2 face-to-face classrooms that are collaborating online. And only about 20% are fully online classrooms collaborating. They're both viable. So that leads to my next sentence, which it's not a single template, one-size-fits-all model. It's a framework which has to be adapted to specific courses, disciplines, and cross-national partnerships. For example, some classes make intensive use of video conferencing, while others have little real-time interaction at all, or just use text chat for that purpose. Most focus, I would say, on asynchronous tools for the ones that are used often in conventional distance learning courses, and use synchronous tools occasionally to build community. But the selection of tools based really depends on the partners, the language skills of the students. That's another thing I won't have time to go into deeply. Most COIL courses presently are offered in English. A few that we've supported have been offered in Spanish, one in Japanese. But the language issue is an amazingly important piece of the discourse. And it's often more difficult to navigate than it seems at first, because so many students and so many schools now are teaching in English. But often it's still not an equal playing field. So in addition to that, time zones, technology availability, and many other factors. And these collaborations can take any length of time that you decide to set them up for. Most people assume it's an entire semester. That's actually the exception. Typically, it's a modularized chunk of a semester. We recommend not doing less than 4 weeks, and even that's cutting it short, because it takes time for students to engage each other, to build up trust, and to actually be able to work together effectively. So I would say typically 6 to 8 weeks is a great period of time to do so. The cooperating teachers, work closely with all students, but in most cases the students are enrolled, charged tuition, and awarded grades only at their home institution. So it's a kind of revenue-neutral model, which has advantages and disadvantages. It reduces the administrative complexity of the bilateral agreements while linking and enhancing the classrooms through the collaborative coursework. So this is a plus in many ways because you can move quickly without a lot of administrative overhead. The problem is many of the international programs, operations that exist in this country and abroad are actually based on a lot of money changing hands. They actually, in many cases, support themselves through the inflow of international students or actually, to some degree, the payment of American students to study abroad. And because this model isn't based on that kind of cash economy, in some cases it's very problematic for administrators to say, I'm going to support this with staff or resources, because you're not actually generating income. You're generating knowledge, you're generating awareness, you're making the students more competent, but where's the money? And I only raise this in this sort of frontal way that I feel like international programs in many schools are a little bollocksed up in this problem, and it's something we have to think about in moving in this direction. I'd also say that the courses do not require expensive technology. Most schools that you work with have the technology already that you need. We're at that point now. When we started doing this 10 or 12 years ago, that often was not the case. Let me just see if I can escape out of this and just show this. So this is an image some of you may have seen. If you've seen me present before, I generally use this image. This is sort of a little model of what we're dealing with on a sort of conceptual level, not the inside classroom, but the whole problem. So we're trying to get our students out into the world, and indeed this slightly goofy graphic is unidirectional. It really should be bidirectional, but we'll leave it at that. So we're trying to build this bridge to get our students out in the world, and to build the bridge, at least when I first thought of it, we need faculty, technology, and international programs all working together. That, at least a few years ago, was extremely rare. In fact, at its outset, I'd never seen this ever happen, because international programs offices at that point never thought of technology as being relevant. Faculty define curriculum. They don't necessarily want international programs people telling them how to modify their curriculum to make them more internationally interesting. So this is an ongoing discussion that fortunately is evolving. In the water is this sort of, sarcastic jokes about the problem, which are real indeed monsters that are real problems. Technophobia, bureaucracy, faculty staff overload, I would offer, is probably the most significant of the problems. And cost. Cost is a problem, but there aren't many hard costs to this. That is, students and faculty can do this, but there are soft costs because you need staff, you need support. If you just tell your faculty, go for it, I pat you on the back, a few faculty will manage that, but most won't. It'll really not be something they're comfortable doing alone. They really need support of different kinds. And the sea of provincialism is probably my most sarcastic piece in this, but the problem is on many campuses, I found this at SUNY, it's like, well, aren't we good enough here? Why do we have to work with a classroom in Turkey? Are you saying they're better than us? We can teach our students what we need to teach them, and that's to me a kind of provincialism. And I think the issues that we're talking about helping our students with are just as prevalent with our teachers and our administrators in many campuses. They're also looking at things very locally, and they're often driven by local budgets. And they're, especially at community colleges, I don't know what it's like out here, but in New York State, community colleges are very affected by their county and by local politics. And to say, well, we're devoting energy to bring international students in sometimes rankles the politicians. It's like, you're supposed to be focused on our local students. Why are you putting energy internationally? So there are a lot of things operating here. So anyway, earlier I said that today seemed like a momentous occasion. And the reason I guess it is for me is that while our center has been producing COIL conferences for almost 8 years, This, to my knowledge, is the first COIL conference taking place elsewhere in the United States. It's been a long road, as the COIL Center was created back in 2006, but despite its somewhat radical premise, what we've developed is really gaining momentum just the last year or two. It's kind of remarkable, the change that I've seen recently. This isn't bragging, I just want to throw out a few things that have happened to contextualize this for you, because I feel like part of what I can do here today is give you framing. And I'll be here all day, so if there's details that I can't come close to talking about in the time I have, just grab me in the halls and ask me this or that. I'd be really glad to, but I'm trying to do overview here more than specifics. I am going to show you one very specific thing in about 5 minutes from a class that I ran. At any rate, over the past 2 years, COIL Center has been invited to do workshops at a number of colleges and universities. In 2013, we partnered with the American Council of Education, the largest higher education organization in the United States, to create an award program for campuses seeking to internationalize through technology. And we're presently working with 3 award-winning schools by supporting them develop COIL programs. We hope this program with ACE will continue. In May 2014, NAFSA's International Educator magazine devoted its cover article, New Windows on the World, to COIL and to similar course development models. I was quoted extensively in the article, as were other COIL practitioners. This was mind-boggling to me. A couple of years ago, I couldn't get a session about COIL accepted into NAFSA. It was like they didn't even see it as valid, something to present as a concept. This year, it was the cover article of their magazine. That is a major shift. So I think this is very important for people thinking about getting involved in this. It's still early days, but at least it's early days where people are saying, yeah, this is interesting, instead of, yeah, well, come tell me something else. Another piece that happened recently was that Inside Higher Education in July also did a lead article called Faculty Use Internet-Based Technologies to Create Global Learning Opportunities. Again, they quoted me and a lot of other, what I would call COIL activists. So while articles themselves don't create sustainable initiatives taken together with other things, universities are seeming much more ready to make commitments to this format. And holding a regional conference like this is another sign of the shift. The more of us working in this modality, the more credible it becomes, and the easier it will be for others to follow in our footsteps. So how did this all come to pass? The COIL model emerged through the activities of university teachers in the United States and abroad, usually working in pairs, but otherwise largely in isolation, even from other teachers attempting similar international collaborations. These co-taught international courses were created in response to an opportunity and a need, at first with little theoretical grounding or administrative support. The need was a rapidly changing and globalizing world that called out for more direct and experiential international engagement between students, and the opportunity emerged from the growth of the internet and its integration into early formats of online learning. Because very few teachers or students have the opportunity to travel or study abroad extensively, the internet began to develop as an alternate site for international academic exchange. And just to share with you the numbers, approximately, and you see different ones, 2% of American students study abroad during their college career. The number is really small. And even though there's a huge effort to expand that number, even if we double or triple it, the numbers are still going to be minuscule. So we have to find other modalities to engage our students. COIL projects were almost always bottom-up initiatives developed and undertaken by teachers with little or no technical or administrative support from either participating university. Sad but true. These courses did not fit the emerging online business model because they were essentially collaborations across cultures rather than courses made available to students for a fee. Because these early COIL courses did not generate significant income for their institutions, the collaborating teachers were often ignored or even unappreciated by their supervisors, and they therefore became especially interdependent, having to largely rely on each other for technical support as they co-constructed and taught the courses they shared. This independence was a hallmark of these co-developed courses, which then became a model for the collaborative activities the teachers designed for the students who enrolled in them. And because pedagogical models and institutional practices vary greatly between countries, I mentioned this about presentation style, it soon became clear that most teachers, that their mutual engagement required a deepening of their own understanding of each other's approach to teaching, learning, assessment, etc. So in this way, these courses usually also develop into rather intensive intercultural professional development opportunities for the collaborating academics. In fact, as we've done this more and more, I would honestly say, maybe this is not a good thing to say, that the people who benefit the most from this in terms of internationalizing their thinking are the professors, the teachers. It doesn't mean the students don't benefit, but the teachers are transformed by it. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my own experience. I'm not sure how much more we'll actually get to, but I want to give you a little bit of how I got into this, not just sort of give you the personal anecdote, but because I think we need some examples of actual courses. I'm not going to get to do too much of that up front here today. So in a nutshell, my background is that I was a film and media professor at a liberal arts college called Purchase College, 30 miles from New York City. And at a certain point, I guess I was already getting a little burned out. I'd been doing this for a long time. I realized that I came from somewhere, which is that my family had 100 years earlier emigrated from what's now the country of Belarus, Eastern Europe. I sort of knew it, but I didn't really know it. It dawned on me in a conversation with my father and an aunt, who were both still alive at that time. And I got this idea to go to Belarus, which led me to apply for a Fulbright there, which led me to go there and teach. I had a kind of amazing experience. So this is an actual travel experience, not a virtual one. It took place in '99. And I brought with me the early digital video cameras. And I let my students, my Belarusian students, make very short videos. And they were really different than my American students' videos. Not just because of what was in front of the camera, but clearly the way they saw the world was really different. Even though they were rudimentary in a sense that none of them had ever touched a video camera in their life before I showed up. I came back from that trip and was very filled with myself and with my experience, suffering from what I learned later as reverse culture shock, that's the term for it. And I kept wanting to tell my students why Belarus was so interesting, and they would go, oh no, there goes Professor Rubin again. And I was really frustrating, and one day I just showed some of the student videos, and I was like, I don't know what happened. It was a magic day in my life because I turned the lights back on and all they wanted to do was talk about Belarus, who the students were, and I was like, what happened? And I realized that those students had spoken to each other. And I started to think back, and I remembered the students in Belarus saying, will any of your students see these? And that didn't matter much to me when I was there because it was my experience with my students. But I realized that they were trying to speak to somebody. In doing this, they were wondering who's going to see this. And I think whenever we work creatively, somewhere in our head we're wondering who's going to see the work that we're producing. And if you project it onto another culture that you don't understand, it's a very interesting experience.